Worth for having us, and what a great program that you all have put on. I'm Stacy Kerr, and it's so nice to be here. And I'm so pleased to be here with a friend and a really, truly dynamic and inspiring leader in this country and globally, Shamina Singh. And Shamina, as Laura said, is the founder and president of Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, and we're going to get into that. That is the social impact hub of Mastercard, and she is also the EVP of Sustainability at Mastercard. She's a member of the management committee, which is a very big deal. Where her remit is to really leverage Mastercard's data, technology, and capital and their expertise for social impact. So we're going to talk about what that means and the work that Shamina's done in that. But Shamina comes from government experience, private sector experience. She was in the White House. We worked together in Congress. We'll talk a little bit about that. President Obama appointed Shamina to the board of AmeriCorps. Are you still on the board? Okay, 6 years she spent on the board of AmeriCorps. She currently serves on the board of the ADL, the Ann Richards School for Young Women Leaders in Austin, Texas. She was listed on Financial Times' top 100 LGBTQ executives and Fast Company's Queer 50 lists. She is truly a global leader and a pioneer, and I'm so glad that you're here to talk about financial inclusion.
And that was our 15 minutes. So, and Stacy, who's vain, and I love her. Do you want me to hold the cards out even further? I mean, we just did the menopause panel, so we can I'm wearing mine. You can wear yours. Okay, but before we start, so Stacy and I, you have to know that Stacy and I have known each other. I don't even know for how long, but my hair was certainly more than 20 years. Stacy's looks exactly the same as she did when I met her in Nancy Pelosi's office. But the reason why we wanted to do this conversation today is because Stacy is the reason, and you don't even know this. You're like the reason why I've had an amazing career at Mastercard, but have a fantastic job at Mastercard. I'll just tell you a quick story. I left Nancy Pelosi's office. You stayed with the soon-to-be Speaker Pelosi. The Prime Minister of India gave a speech to the joint session of Congress. You got me a ticket to come to that speech. I met the future CEO of Mastercard, Ajay Banga, at that speech.
I didn't know that story.
And because I worked for him at Citi, I was starting to work for him at Citi within 2 weeks of that speech. He heard me talking about Citi. He tapped me on the shoulder and he said, "Hi, my name's Ajay Banga. I heard you mention Citi. I work at Citi." And then I said, Ajay, and for those of you who don't know, Ajay Banga is he was the CEO of Mastercard. He was a big deal at Citi. He's now about to become the president of the World Bank. He said, I asked him why he was alone at the thing. I called you and you said, bring him to Pelosi's office. And I looked like the biggest freaking deal because I was able to meet that guy and take him to meet Nancy Pelosi. And that was because of you. And from then on, he called me the fixer. He was like, "You're the fixer." And that actually had an enormous impact on my career for the last 10 years at Mastercard. So I owe you.
Wow. And I did not know that story. So Shamina and I did overlap and first met working in Democratic politics and both working for Nancy Pelosi before she became Speaker the first time. We were joined by a colleague and a dear friend of Shamina's, Cecile Richards, the daughter of the wonderful Ann Richards and a great personal friend of Shamina's. So I knew at the time when I met Shamina taught me so much early in my career. And I knew at the time that she was going to be one to watch. And when she left and I stayed in government in the Speaker's office, I did watch her because she was a friend. And then it was like, there was no way that I could look anywhere without seeing Shamina's footprint and impact in what she was doing in the corporate world and what she was doing in the impact world. So she really is a pioneer in the space. And I say president of the center, but founder of the center. So talk about that. So you were at Citi, and then you went over to Mastercard, and there was just a foundation. There was what was that? And Were you hired to do that, or how did it get started?
Right. So I went from, actually, I went from Citi to Nike for a split second and then ran to Mastercard because Ajay Banga became the CEO of Mastercard. And he asked me to come in, and basically, at the time, Mastercard had about 5,000 employees. It had fairly recently gone public. So Ajay was really the first CEO hired to build the company as a public company. The first thing to know is that when Mastercard went public, it took 10% of the stock and created the Mastercard Foundation. So the largest shareholder in Mastercard today is actually the Mastercard Foundation. That foundation is today valued at over $40 billion. And it does all of the work in Africa. I sit on the board ex officio of the foundation. But even then, what we decided to do was build out the business strategy of the company inclusive of a social impact lens. And so what does that mean? And that's kind of what I did there, was to understand what the assets of Mastercard were and are, which is basically a payments company. So 3 billion credit card holders, 90 million merchants, 210 countries. So an enormous scale, an enormous network that allows for a lot of things to happen, a lot of transactions to happen. But basically the idea was, how do you build out a business strategy that leaves a legacy for the company of social impact? And we quickly realized that the legacy or the big business issue that we were looking to solve was the inherent costs of cash. And we did a ton of research around understanding that cash is expensive. In fact, it takes 2 to 5% of GDP, depending, for those that transact in cash, because cash requires leakage. It's about corruption. It's about bacteria. During COVID, we all moved away from cash. So the transition to digital, I'm going on a little bit, but it's important to understand, I think, that the shift from cash to digital, analog to digital, that we're seeing now started a long time ago. And we were one of the first to see that as actually the business incentive, to say that at the time, over 2 billion people were operating in a cash economy. And so we went to our shareholders to say, if we can digitize the cash economy, not only will, look, Visa and Amex are competitors, but we recharacterized our biggest competitor as cash. And that's when Mastercard stock shot up like a rocket and has kept going over the last 11 years. And so my job was to figure out what the business strategy and how you had a business and an impact strategy living in the same conversation.
I mean, I wasn't kidding when I say that Shamina has been a pioneer in the space to create this and to bring others along in partnership, and I want to get into that. But Shamina, do you, for those that don't know the worker, or don't live in the social impact world, is this philanthropy? Is it foundation? Is it impact? And what does that mean? Is it development?
It's all of the above, I think. I think that look, you just heard this panel. I wasn't here all day, but Sally Krawcheck, I worked with her when she was at Citi. She was the CFO at Citi. You have all these incredible women that you're hearing from that are figuring out that a social enterprise is an enterprise. It's a business strategy. And so this idea that you separate philanthropic capital from business capital is not really real. And I think that's the trick, is that philanthropic capital is part of the capital stack. It's just the riskiest part of the capital stack.
And speaking of capital, so you started the center, you grew the center, you had this impact mission, and then in 5 years ago, right, 2018, you got $500 million.
Exactly.
$500 million.
So
the business.
So we built a model at the Center for Inclusive Growth that basically tried to turn corporate philanthropy on its head and sort of say, not only do we not believe that the corporate philanthropy needs to be completely separate from the business, we actually believe that they rely on each other. And so instead of MasterCard focusing on something that had nothing to do with payments, like malaria or something else, which some companies do, we actually said, no, actually our philanthropic capital is going to go around financial inclusion, the digital economy, ensuring equitable and sustainable economic growth for women in underserved communities globally. And when I guess that tax cut came, and instead of
Teen tax cut.
the 2017 tax cut, and instead of Mastercard saying we're going to give all the, I'm just going to have a it still brings tears to my eyes.
Get all that money.
No, instead of Mastercard sort of had the wisdom. We had a female CFO at the time, Martina Hanmajan, who tells a story that said, we're going to give our dividends back. We're going to put the money back into the company as many other companies did. But she said this is a once in a lifetime moment to double down on social impact. And so that's what we did at Mastercard. So they basically said the center has been developing a theory of the case around social and economic impact for then about 5 years. And so they basically said, we're going to endow the center to fulfill its strategy with an initial investment of $500 million and then continue that investment of $100 million every year in perpetuity.
And part of the reason, y'all can clap for that. That was part of the reason that they were able to do that, Shamina, is because you developed what you call a formula for impact that the center already had established. And talk about what that is.
So I think we're really this model, and believe me, I had the flexibility and freedom to build it at Mastercard, but it's one that anybody can take, and I've heard it applied in different settings. And basically, it's an impact model that says insights, so build the evidence base, to create programmatic impact, so create programmatic work, but don't stop there. Use influence. And none of it, I mean, it all works, but it doesn't scale unless you invest in the storytelling, the convening, this type of gathering, but the work of communications, media, and marketing around telling the story of social impact. And so that's actually another reason why you and I have reconnected recently, because I think you're an enormously important storyteller, and that's kind of the work that you're doing. And so how do you, I mean...
Well, in helping brands, how do you bring a brand to life? And how do you bring the work that you're doing at the center and around to make it known and make the impact known and humanize it?
Exactly. But I think that it's this idea that it's like, you can have impact. That's fantastic. You can develop the evidence base. You can develop this, the part of this is making sure that you invest in the research so that people trust you when you say, believe in this investment. But unless you do the work of the influence, like unless we're working with legislators, unless we're working with other CEOs, other private sector companies, other public sector companies, in terms of sharing the learnings and figuring out ways to partner, it really limits the amount of work we can do. And I think that's really the secret sauce at the center, is to ensure that we are constantly thinking about insights, impact, and influence.
So let's talk about you mentioned the many stakeholders, and I'm curious, like when you think about
15 minutes are up, by the way.
Oh yeah, here we go. Whose responsibility is this? The work you're doing, some people would say it's the government's responsibility. Some people would say it's all the big bad profits of corporate and it's their responsibility. And I think if I'm following you and what you're saying in this, it's everyone's responsibility.
I think that's absolutely right. But I also think that we have different superpowers, right? And so I think that's also the point. It's like, what's your unique contribution? One of the things that I've said before is that if you want to go broad and wide, go with governments. If you want to go deep, go with academics and social enterprises, NGOs. If you want to go fast, go with private sector. But if you want to go far, we all go together. And so it's sort of like, how do you ensure that we are going far and we are achieving the collective positive outcomes we want for society, but that each piece of the puzzle is leveraging their best asset to contribute?
And I want to read this quote from you, Shamina, on financial inclusion, because I think this is what you're saying. And that is, Shamina said, think of financial inclusion as a pathway out of poverty and inclusive growth as a path to shared prosperity. The former is transactional, the latter is transformational. And when I read that you said that,
You couldn't believe it.
No, I could believe it. I could believe it because the Shamina that I knew 20 years ago was working in labor politics, working in Democratic politics, was focused on the transactional. And the Shamina that I followed and the Shamina that built this Center for Inclusive Growth is exactly this. How can all of these come together and be transformational?
Well, I think that's what we're all trying to figure out, right? It's sort of like, how do we make sure that we can move from the transactional, and that the transactional is important, by the way, but that in the end, I think our legacy is about ensuring that we transform and we move from transactions and financial inclusion to shared prosperity. So,
okay, last question I want to say, and then I'm going to do a quick lightning round, but and we are going to stay within our time. Talk about gender and financial inclusion. That could be its own day long, but how do you think about gender in the context of the work you're doing?
That it's real. Like you have to be inclusive by design. And you've heard a lot of social enterprises talk about that. I think today you hear Sally Krawcheck talk about investment as we play poker, or some of us played poker last night, talked about the risk reward. So financial inclusion when it relates to women is a very real proposition. Currently in the United States, it's a very big deal in terms of the income gap between men and women, but globally, and this is something that you may not think about every day because you're sitting here, but access to a smartphone is not a given for most women in the world. And in fact, the smartphone is the thing that is unlocking all of the productivity and the potential of women around the world. That smartphone is allowing financial inclusion. Most women in the world today are still working on a feature phone, but their smartphone belongs to the family. So in order to get a smartphone, you've got to be able to purchase one, right? In order to purchase one, most of the time, you have to get a loan to do it. Around the world, women don't have collateral because they don't have access to things like tractors that people put up with banks. And so one of the things we're trying to do with feature phones and the data that comes on those is redefine collateral and use your usage on a smartphone as a proxy for credit score. And that's when women win, is when we change the conversation around data. We change the conversation around credit. We change the conversation around collateral. That's the power of moving from transaction to transformation.
So good. All right, 3 quick lightning round. Modern day dinner guest you'd most like to sit with?
Modern day dinner guest. Well, I just did my Let Your Inner Elton Out, so probably Elton John. I was wearing a pink boa just a second ago.
Fair. Best business leader currently running something?
Well, I got to say Michael Miebach, who's the CEO of Mastercard.
I should have said
and
that's not the CEO of Mastercard. Yeah. Final question. Worst advice you ever received?
Quit band. My older sister told me to quit band. I played the clarinet and from 6th grade to 8th grade, and now I can't read music. I used to be able to read music and play an instrument. And
Shamina comes from all sisters, so when one of them spoke, you had to listen.
Exactly.
Shamina, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you.